As years pass by, many younger audiences forget about horror movies from 10, 20, even 30 years ago. Now movies come out, older ones age, and people forget. Some folks don't particularly like watching black and white movies, and some only watch blockbuster hits. Whatever it may be, it's a criminal offense if you ask me. Classic horror is some of the best horror, with the 60s, 70s, and 80s blessing us with some of the best scares the genre has ever seen. So today on Top 5 Scary Videos, I'm going to be counting down our list of the top 5 classic horror movies still worth watching. Before we begin though, be sure to stick around until the end of the video where I'll be responding to some of your comments. And with that, let's jump in. In at number 5, The Birds. At this point I shouldn't even need to tell you why The Birds is such a classic and should definitely be revisited by horror lovers every year. This movie is iconic and gets better and better with age. Directed by Alfred Hitchcock and released in 1963, this horror is loosely based on the 1952 story of the same name and focuses on a series of unexplained bird attacks on the people of Bodega Bay in California. The movie stars Rod Taylor, Tippi Hedren, and Jessica Tandy, with it being the movie that propelled Hedren into the limelight. Though the movie itself may sound ridiculous, it is truly a terrifying and bizarre film that quickly made everyone second guess Bird's true intentions. The movie was such a success, it has since been deemed culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant by the United States Library of Congress back in 2016, essentially selecting it for preservation. Now of course the most iconic part of the movie is the simple fact that the majority of birds used in the film were in fact real, which of course resulted in a few minor injuries to Tippi Hedren, who suffered a lot on the set of the movie, with Hitchcock being known to be particularly nightmarish. On top of that, Hitchcock also signed Hedren to a 7-year contract which restricted her from working at any other studio. This of course only came out following the death of the director. Despite that, the movie itself is a work of art and one of the most significant horror movies in the genre's history. Killer Birds. It sounds impossible, but Hitchcock made it happen, and he did it with swagger, that's for sure. In at 4, we have The Last Man on Earth. Released in 1964 and directed by Sidney Salco, The Last Man on Earth is a black and white horror movie based on the novel I Am Legend, written by Richard Matheson in 1954. Now most will of course know the movie starring Will Smith, I Am Legend. However, this film was its predecessor. Starring Vincent Price, the Earth is stricken by a disease, with one man, Morgan, struggling to survive by killing vampires. Everyone on Earth has been infected by a plague which has turned them into undead vampires that fear mirrors and cannot stand the sunlight. They are weak, in turn not killing Morgan, with the lone survivor going about the same routine every single day until everything begins to fall apart around him. Now despite not being favourable upon release, it has gone down in history as one of the greatest classic horror movies that people should definitely watch, with many people returning to it each and every year. Some folks even go as far as to call it the greatest Vincent Price movie ever, which is quite the bold statement. I'm not sure I agree with it. Despite that though, writer Richard Matheson was unsatisfied with the finished product and instead opted to be credited as Logan Swanson. In at 3, we have The Changeling. The Changeling is considered to be one of the most frightening movies of all time, and it has every right to hold such a grand title. Directed by Peter Medak and released in 1980, this Canadian supernatural horror follows a New York composer who moves to a mansion in Seattle which he believes to be haunted. He quickly discovers that the home is haunted by a young boy named Joseph Carmichael, who was murdered by his own father and is desperately hoping someone will learn the truth about his death. It is a terrifying, harrowing, yet emotional story that takes you on a roller coaster ride of emotion. It also tells of the changeling, you know, someone being replaced by someone else, the doppelganger. It opts for exposition instead of jump scares, which truly works in the film's favour. The screenplay itself is based on the experiences of Russell Hunter, the co-writer of the movie, while he was living in the Henry Treat Rogers mansion in Denver, Colorado in the late 60s. According to Hunter, he experienced a series of unexplained phenomena in the home, with him even discovering a century-old journal hidden in a room detailing the life of a disabled young boy who was kept in isolation, which is absolutely gut-wrenching to think about. Hunter then claimed to have a seance, during which time the spirit of a deceased boy guided him to another home where human remains were discovered alongside a gold medallion bearing the boy's name. Very spooky indeed. Coming in at 2, we have The Haunting. Perhaps one of my favourite horror movies based on one of my favourite books. The Haunting is a 1963 horror directed by Robert Weiss and based on the novel The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. Many of you will of course be familiar with the television show of the same name, but it should be noted that the show is drastically different from the novel and the movie. That is unrelated to the point. The British horror starred the likes of Julie Harris, Claire Bloom, Richard Johnson, and Russ Tamblyn, with it following the experiences of a small group of people who are invited to a supposedly haunted house by a paranormal investigator. The movie, in essence, is a slow descent into madness as we watch two women, Nell and Theo, lose their minds to fear. As the most faithful adaptation of one of Shirley Jackson's novels, The Haunting successfully manages to scare the wits out of all viewers by doing very little. By brilliantly using black and white and stranding characters in claustrophobic rooms and oddly shaped hallways, the movie is suffocating and isolating. On top of that, the movie is incredibly effective in the fact that it will make you question exactly what you are seeing on screen. Is something supernatural at play in this old house, or is Nell gradually losing her mind over the course of the movie? That is for you to decide. Upon initial release, audiences were said to be so frightened by this movie they were physically jumping out of their seats and even losing items in the process. In Houston, Texas, a competition was held to see which of 4 patrons would be able to sit all the way through a midnight screening of the movie, with the prize being $100. And finally, coming in at number 1, we have Black Christmas. Black Christmas is perhaps not just one of my favorite horror movies of all time, but one of my favorite movies of all time. There is a reason this movie is a classic and revisited by many each and every year. Now, I am specifically talking about the original here, not the trashy remakes, let's make that known. Directed by Bob Clark and released back in 1974, this Canadian slasher follows a group of sorority sisters who begin receiving threatening calls from an unknown stalker, who eventually goes on to hunt them down and kill them one by one during the Christmas season. Starring the likes of Olivia Hussey, Margot Kidder, and John Saxon, this movie was inspired by the classic legend of the babysitter and the man upstairs, as well as a series of murders that took place in Montreal, Quebec. The movie from beginning to end is an utter thrill ride, with the calls becoming increasingly more aggressive, and the sorority sisters quickly getting taken down in very gruesome and grisly ways. Now, what made this movie so damn wonderful was the simple fact that the characters weren't straight-laced girls next door like many slasher movies prior to this were depicting them as. They all had issues. One was an alcoholic, one was a rebel, one was pregnant out of wedlock. They were human characters, something at that point people were rarely seeing. It is also a whodunit story, with us constantly guessing who the killer could possibly be. Is it the boyfriend? Is it one of the sorority girls? Is it the chief of police? And oh boy, when you find out, it is a real doozy. On top of that, the movie is of course Canadian and was filmed in Toronto, which is where I live, so props. Now, like many horror movies, Black Christmas polarized critics upon its initial release. However, with time came more adoration, with the movie now being considered a cult classic and one of the greatest horror movies ever made. Not to mention, it is one of my favorite Christmas movies to watch each December. Nothing like seeing someone get killed on Father Christmas Day. Well, there we have it. Do you guys agree with that list? Are there any classic horror movies that we missed? Leave us all your thoughts and feelings in the comments down below, and perhaps I'm gonna do a part 2. Before I go though, I just want to respond to a few comments from one of our last videos, top 5 masked killers in horror movies. Chandela Kendra said, Lucy just dragging Shane with her accent makes everything so much better. Honestly, I could drag Shane Dawson for days. What hasn't he done that's pissed me off? Smiley though was the worst of the worst. In what world does he think he can act? He can't. He acts like he's a good guy. He's a shit person. He should be cancelled. I will cancel him. Gordon Mathers said, You're Next, The Purge, The Strangers. All great picks, maybe part 2, if it happens, who knows. We never know. You're Next though is great, one of my favourite horror movies, and no one talks about it enough. The best. Bryce Levasseur said, Love Trick or Treat and must watch during Halloween, but for me, once a month. A little concerning you're watching it once a month, but I do agree it's an amazing horror movie and should be watched every single Halloween. It's the best. I can't wait to watch it. One more month. Arthur said, watching this while playing my favourite game, Friday the 13th. I played Friday the 13th a couple times. I was bored as f. The best one though you should play is Dead by Daylight if you want to actually play a good game. There you go. Don't waste your time with Friday the 13th. Waste of time. R.A. Hatcher said, no Jason, he has to be the coolest looking mass killer out there. Look, it was my list. Yeah, Jason wasn't on it. I just picked people that scared me, personally. Jason doesn't scare me. That's all. Pectorialist said, how about Pyramid Head? I actually did forget about Pyramid Head, and I'm sorry, I wish I had included it on the list. Maybe next time. And on that note, if you haven't already, be sure to give this video a big thumbs up, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss another scary vid. And until next time, see you later. So today on Top 5 Scary Videos, I'm going to be counting down our list of the top 5 classic horror movies still worth watching right here on Top 10 be on the screen. What the f? It is truly a terrifying and bizarre film that quickly made everyone second guess birds. That truly...